In the entirety of last year, the one smartphone that gave me the biggest goosebumps moment, that feeling of holy cow this is cool, was Huawei's P30 Pro. So you can probably imagine, the P40 Pro is exciting to me. And this time round they've dropped not just a P40 Pro, but also a P40 Pro Plus, which does sound a little bit like a Huawei branded protein bar, but it's actually their new tier of superphone. First up, the standard P40 Pro. The box isn't a massive departure from prior Huawei phones, with the exception of this Explore It on App Gallery label. There's the smartphone, which I gotta say has some immediate weight to it, a tray, and then your standard fare insert, containing a SIM ejector tool and a TPU case. It's simple, very lightly textured on the inside, with a little Huawei logo on the bottom corner. The rest of the unboxing experience is very familiar. Huawei's 40-watt supercharger, a USB-C cable, and a pair of reasonably capable wired earphones. So I've got my P30 Pro here, and the most immediate change is that the camera module is even bigger. We've seen quite a lot of this over the last few years. Cameras are becoming the biggest differentiating factor between flagships, so they're slowly invading more and more of the backs of our phones. Attack of the cameras. That makes it sound like a low-budget Star Wars film. As for that finish, I will say this. The P20 Pro was pretty much the first phone to introduce a gradient finish. I loved it. The P30 Pro came with Aurora, which took that to the next level, and so a very small part of me is disappointed that they didn't take this to the next level with the P40. But on the other hand, I had the widest grin on my face when unboxing this, because it now has a matte finish. It's still an evolution, just maybe not in the direction we were expecting, but understated design sells. There's a reason why pretty much every company makes a plain black version of their phone. You flip it around though, and there's no subtlety here. The P40 Pro is the first smartphone in the world with what they call an overflow display. It's curved on not just the sides, but also the top and bottom. Although, from what I can see, it looks more like it's the glass that's doing most of the curving here, not the display. You know when you have a cup of water, and you filled it right to the brim, and there's that little bit of surface tension on top? Yeah, that's kind of what this screen reminds me of. And it's a good display. I remember my first thought being just, wow, that's a clean, bright panel. But about an hour later I noticed something. It is minor, but I just can't unsee it. There's quite an unusual lack of symmetry here. The sides have a different thickness to the top, which in itself has a different thickness to the bottom. You've got, I think, the biggest hole punch cutout I've ever seen on a phone, positioned in what feels like a fairly weird location. I almost want to just push it a millimeter to the left. But the thing that irks me, and this could just be me, it might not bother you at all, but it's the corners. Because of how the glass curves down here, and it curves down here, you've almost got 4 points in the bezel that feel like they're protruding. Anyways, there's also an underscreen fingerprint scanner, and it's about 30% larger and 30% faster than last year. And that makes more difference than you'd think. It's still a standard optical scanner, but the extra sensor area means you can almost miss the icon and it'll still scan your finger. Plus, there's secure 3D face unlocking thanks to an infrared sensor hidden in this hole punch, which does somewhat explain the size of the protrusion. It's great face unlocking though, it even works perfectly in the dark, so maybe worth the trade-off. What I really like here is that, yeah, it's not a small phone, but at least Huawei isn't trying to build a tablet like it feels like a lot of companies are doing now. It's got a 6.58-inch OLED display, and with its narrow sides, I'd say it's more manageable than Samsung's S20 Plus and S20 Ultra, with quite an unusual screen resolution of 2640 by 1200. That sits somewhere between Full HD Plus and Quad HD Plus, so it's not the sharpest screen out there, but I'm someone who tends to keep their phone running at full HD anyways, so it definitely feels sharp enough. And you probably wouldn't want to use this on Quad HD Plus, even if it was an option. The phone already has a 90Hz refresh rate to improve screen fluidity, and not the biggest battery at 4200 mAh, so adding an ultra high resolution on top of that might be pushing it a step too far. I'm not saying battery will be bad here. Huawei software is famously aggressive, meaning that it prioritizes the minimization of background processes to preserve battery. But detailed battery comparison coming in a couple of days, so if you could subscribe for that, that would be amazing. Now, Huawei has always paid attention to their cameras, and if the size of the module wasn't already indication enough, the P40 Pro and Pro Plus, which I'll get to, are no exception. In fact, in a way, I'd say this is their biggest jump yet. When it comes to cameras, the central component is the sensor, and for the most part, a larger sensor equals better photos. So last year, the Huawei P30 Pro brought in an almost market-leading sensor size. Samsung then leapfrogged that this year with their S20 Ultra, but now the P40 Pro has just one-upped that. It's a 50 megapixel main camera, which I realize is not that helpful a figure, but Huawei said it will capture the kind of detail that will mean each photo can tell multiple stories at once. That you could crop into any part of a shot and see enough detail that it will stand alone in its own right. In practice, I'm not sold on that angle, but what I can say is that whilst it might not be number one in this race for pixels, from the time I've spent with it so far, I think this takes the best photos I've ever seen on a phone. Within 5 minutes of testing it, I'd come to that conclusion, and I stood by it after hours more. Shots are lush, but not in a really fake way that some older Huawei phones have tended towards. The large sensor means natural background blur. None of this at all was taken in portrait mode, and you can quite comfortably crop into these photos and still have a pin-sharp result. And there's a whole lot more going on in terms of both the software and the hardware of this camera system. For example, octave phase detection autofocus, or in other words, practically instant focusing on whatever pops into view. Not to mention the weight given to AI features this time round. The P40 Pro comes with the same Kirin 990 5G chip that we saw on the Mate 30 Pro last year, but according to Huawei, it's only with this phone that they've truly taken advantage of its AI capabilities. I'm always a bit hesitant with the way AI is constantly used to market smartphones, but these are cool features. In the past, Huawei phones could recognize environments and pets and sort of tune your photos accordingly, but that range of scenarios that it can now recognize is far greater. It can know which sport you're taking a photo of, the posture of people sitting around you, and even their facial expressions. So in theory, this better understanding leads to better photos. So for example, it'll know you're taking a photo of an annoying reflective object, and it can reduce reflections. Or it can know if someone has just jumped into the back of your photo without you realizing, completely ruined it, it can snap them out of existence. You can literally see it in action. Take a photo, wait 2 to 3 seconds, and then watch the AI do its work. But more importantly, I'd say, is that this image processing engine is also important for night mode, and I was expecting to be amazed here. Huawei's P20 Pro a couple of years ago, that phone blew me away. The P30 Pro blew me away again, and sure enough, it is even better now. This right here is a screen recording to give you an idea. We're in almost pitch black, and yet, it's just phenomenal. Photos shot in dim rooms look like they could have been taken with floodlights shining on them. Not to mention, you can literally point the camera up at the sky and handheld capture photos like these. And video. Huawei phones have historically focused on taking good photos, but video's never been a priority. Well, it seems like P40 is a big jump in the right direction. You can take 4K video on the front camera, and the rear can now do 4K at 60 frames per second, as well as that crazy ultra-slow 7680 frame per second video that we saw on the Mate 30 Pro. The video is also now steadier than before. The phone combines optical image stabilization with AI stabilization, and it works better in low light. As someone who gets excited about cameras, this has been a fun few days, but I almost feel like there's a more important trend going on with this phone. So the way it works with most flagships is you have one amazing primary camera, but then all the other cameras on the phone, the ultra-wide, the telephoto, your front cameras, they all kind of play second fiddle to this. You feel this noticeable drop in quality when switching between them, and this is something Huawei has absolutely nailed. As well as that main 50 megapixel camera, you get a 32 megapixel dual front-facing camera, which is definitely the best I've ever seen from the company. This was taken with the sun directly behind me, and this was taken in a dimly lit room, and you can still crop in and see details. There's a high-end 40 megapixel ultra-wide camera, a time-of-flight camera for depth detection, and the telephoto camera is even better than last year's. It has 5 times optical zoom with better stabilization and a much better sensor. So more than ever, it doesn't feel like your camera system has a weak link, if that makes sense. Although I'll save any detailed comparisons for a separate video coming very soon. Now, that telephoto camera serves as a pretty perfect segue to talk about the elephant in the room, because yes, this time around Huawei has a P40, a P40 Pro, but also a P40 Pro Plus. It's a strategy we're just starting to see this year. Have a normal flagship, have a Pro flagship, and then have like an Ultra level flagship, because or because it makes more profit. Take a look at Samsung. There'll be a whole load of consumers that are drawn into buying a Galaxy S20 because it does have amazing specs for £800 here in the UK, but a portion of those people will then start comparing it to the S20 Plus and the S20 Ultra, and before they know it have convinced themselves that they're actually willing to pay 50% more to get those extra features. The Ultra gives the least value for money out of the entire S20 lineup, but it's the best-selling model. So, with that in mind, the P40 Pro Plus takes the P40 Pro and dials a couple of things up to the next level. That quad camera setup, for example, now becomes a penta. Attack of the cameras. You heard it here first. It's actually a bit of a shame. I do have a P40 Pro Plus on its way to me, but it's stuck in customs. So I haven't actually used it yet. But the extra lens it adds is interesting. Huawei has essentially swapped out the 5x zoom camera on the Pro for two different zoom cameras, one with 3x optical zoom and one with 10x. 10x optical zoom. That's a world record, and in fact, it's doubling the P40 Pro and pretty much every other smartphone camera out there. The 3x is just there to give you more consistency as you kind of slowly zoom into things. If you just had a 10x zoom, your photo quality at say 5x zoom would kind of suck. And the other thing is finish. This phone swaps out glass for nanotech ceramic, which supposedly has the strength of sapphire and the reflective index of diamonds. Okay, so a couple of important things about the P40 Pro before I bring this all together. I want to just make a distinction between power and speed, because this phone, with its Kirin 995G chip and 8 gigs of LPDDR4X RAM, is not the most powerful phone on the market. And you might feel it in heavy tasks like emulation and gaming, but at the same time I would say it's one of the fastest phones. We're at a stage where the general speed of your phone is less about processor and more about things like how fast your software is, and Huawei's MUI combined with this new 90Hz screen refresh rate does make this phone fly, whether it's menus, web pages, or apps. And on that note, this software is largely the same as what you're used to, but it comes with a new voice assistant, Celia. It's obviously very early days, so I won't judge it yet, but early impressions are that it talks with a fluent English accent, which is good, but also that it seems to struggle with things that should be child's play for an assistant. Huawei's app gallery is a bigger focus here, because that's the main way you're going to download apps on it, but I want to save this for a separate video, because there's so much to it and what it means for the phone. Also, I mentioned that the wired charging is at 40 watts, but new here is that you can wirelessly charge at 40 watts. You will still have to buy a wireless charger separately, but all of a sudden, being able to wirelessly charge without a speed compromise makes it a much more tantalizing offer. The phone has a 4-layer cooling system, IP68 water and dust resistance, support for expandable storage, Wi-Fi 6 Plus functionality, and no headphone jack. Okay, so my impressions of the P40 Pro after a few days of using it are that it is many steps in the right direction. Pretty much every aspect of the P30 Pro is better here. Display, camera, performance. But we're just gonna have to wait and see on those detailed camera and battery comparisons how it stacks up to its current competition. So, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.